Welcome back to the Cherie Rickard Show, a podcast where faith and business intersect to inspire you and empower you as women. Each week, I'm sharing powerful messages of faith, offering practical business advice, and discussing strategies for achieving success. I'm featuring insightful conversations with industry leaders and faith-driven women, providing you with tools and inspiration to grow your business while staying true to your spiritual values. Now let's get ready, ladies. Let's rise, pray, and conquer, and let's dive in. My guest today, Carolyn Wiley, is an award-winning educator, speaker, and author dedicated to empowering Christian women to share their stories boldly. She has a doctorate in education and a proven track record of helping hundreds grow in their faith. She has an engaging ministry, The Ruby Tent, and she is an experienced author whose works have generated millions in sales. Carolyn has crafted online Bible courses and authored First Steps of Faith. She is so excited to launch her latest program, Get It Written. It's a transformational journey designed to help first-time Christian authors overcome self-doubt and turn their testimonies into their impactful published works. Hey, Carolyn, how are you doing?
I am doing fabulous. How are you, Cherie?
Doing good. Thank you so much for joining me. So we met, so the audience knows, we met in an amazing conference in Panama City Beach. Wasn't it great?
It was amazing.
And you know what? It's so funny because it lights a fire in you to be able to do your thing. So I had all of these things in waiting. My conference, I was like, should I do a conference? Should I do a retreat? And it just kind of solidified exactly and confirmed that I want to have both. So it was like, okay, it's going to be a conference / retreat because it's going to be a little bit not as formal in business as Judy, but we are going to have business conversations. Part of that is going to be on how to take your pain, turning your pain into purpose. And part of that is writing your story. So I think it's so wonderful because people, like I told you before we started recording, is people would come to me for years after my book was published in 2014 and say, well, how did you do it? What did you do? I had that traditional publisher, but because of, unforeseen reasons, I had to take that back. And then I thought, well, now I have the book back again. How am I going to self-publish it? And it went into so much research on trying to figure this out that I was like, man, I should teach a course. So I did. I taught a course, but you find out really quickly, it's like, that is not my forte. I'd like to help people, but that's not what I do as a faith and business coach. But it's great to have people like you that I can refer them to. So let's kind of dive into your story and just share a little bit about your personal story and how God called you to start telling your story and how that looked for you.
Okay, so I actually was first published as a very unknowing 20-something-year-old. I was teaching at a university, and I had two amazing girlfriends who were also professionals teaching alongside me, and we just didn't like the curriculum. And so we got bold and we said, well, we're going to write our own. And the software publisher came one day and we started visiting with them, and kind of on a whim, we just said, well, what if we wrote the textbook for this software? Because we knew that the curriculum we had written already matched it. And they said yes. And so we were like, oh my gosh. And we knew nothing about the publishing industry. We knew nothing about writing other than what God had already prepared in our hearts and minds. And we didn't even realize how much He had already prepared us. And that's what I experienced with most writers. They actually have been writers for years and didn't even realize that that's what they were doing. So we dove in, ended up publishing highly successful textbooks over years, publishing my dissertation. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to write my story, I want my control over it, because this is something that God has walked me through. I don't want a publisher coming in and telling me you can't do this, or I want you to take this angle with it. So I really had to start researching, well, what does the self-publishing world look like? And found that it was so, so different. I actually walked through 14 years of rebellion to God, where I was living in a homosexual lifestyle. And when he brought me out of that, I was sitting in church, crying, weeping, praising God. And I heard almost an audible voice tell me, Carolyn, you're going to have to tell your story. And of
Wow.
course, 14 years of rebellion, I had gotten really good at saying, no, Lord. And
Mhm.
that those words just don't go together. And so I was like, oh, what am I going to do? How am I going to tell this story? And thankfully, he has continually eased me into that through telling friends and family, then telling my church family, and now sharing on stages across the South United States. And
Wow.
so that is the process. And so, and then sharing stories, I started doing all this research, finding out all of the things my traditional publisher was doing that I didn't know you would need to even
Mm.
do when you're self-publishing, like marketing, like sales. You know, I was thinking, I'm an author. I'm not a salesman. I don't know how to sell this thing. Well,
Right.
we're going to have to learn how to sell. And he has just been so faithful to continually show and teach at every step of the journey. And that's what he does. And so now I have been so blessed to be able to help other share their story of transformation with the world.
That's wonderful. So if somebody has a story, and there's countless people that have told me about
Absolutely.
their stories that they want to share, and most of them are definitely worthy of being shared and could help and inspire and also teach, right? Because in some
Absolutely.
stories you learn, like my story of grief, and what I do with that and the coaching aspect of it, as well as being able to speak from an experience of education as well as experience that I never wanted. What would you tell that person that has the story and says, okay, I have the story, I've been writing this story, and I said, okay, go to Carolyn. What would be the first thing that you would do to work with that person?
What a great question. The first thing we would do would be come up with the theme, because that theme is going to outline the whole process for us. And then after using that theme to outline the process, we would literally just get to work writing out each piece, because that outline then becomes a plug and play process that you just follow and you
Hmm.
just write each piece. And then once you have that, I would introduce them to the different types of professionals they'll need to work with to get it absolutely beautiful and honoring to God out in the world. The editors, the different types of editors, the cover designers, the formatters, marketing and PR, how to sell, how to talk to the various different book industries, teaching them that you can publish on things other than just Amazon KDP. I mean, there's
Right.
just so many resources out there because the publishing industry has just flown open the doors for
Right.
indie authors.
Right. So tell me about sharing the testimony. So if you have a testimony to shape that into a story. Is that what you mean? Like being able to take their testimony of basically going from ground zero or from that adversity and what I do in adversity recovery, you would be able to take that person's story and say, this is what we need to do. If they want to go the publishing route, what if they say, okay, I don't have all of this money to invest in all of
Right.
these different things. I just need you, Carolyn, to guide me on how I can do this myself. Then is that something you can do for people that want to be able to take their pain or take their mess to their message and all of these different aspects, the way we explain them, be able to take their adversity and help someone else? Can they do that from a self-publishing standpoint?
So, one of the myths of self publishing is that it's free.
Yeah.
And just like any of the lies that the enemy tells us, right, there's just enough truth in it to make us believe it.
Hmm.
So when it comes to self-publishing, is it free? Yes and no. Can I do every piece of it by myself with no dollars invested? Absolutely. Will it look like the same product as if I invested in the professional editors, the professional cover designers, graphic artists, all of these things that a traditional publishing house invests in? No, it's not going to. Now, if you happen to be an artist, your cover might look the same as a traditional publishing house. So that would be part of the process I would work with them in, is identifying their own zones of genius when it comes to writing. Like if they're an amazing proofreader, well, we might talk about how an author could proofread, but almost
Mm.
no author edits their own work.
Mm-mm. No,
That
wouldn't
just
recommend that.
doesn't that just doesn't happen. You have to have editors to edit your work. Now, your bestest friend in the world might be an editor, right? And so you
Mhm.
say, "Hey, bestie, what can you do this for?" And they say, "Well, I can do it for you doing this for me." Those things can happen. However, you realistically are looking at having to spend money. And that's the myth of people who want to go the self-publishing route. They choose that route because they're saying, oh, well, I don't want to spend any of this money.
Right,
Or they'll say, well, because I don't have any money to spend up front, I'm going to go the traditional route. Great. Absolutely. But you're going to have to sell yourself. It still comes down to sales. You're going to have to sell yourself to those literary agents because you're not going to get in front of those publishers, or you're going to
right,
have to choose to sell yourself to the smaller presses, which are amazing. There's so many
right,
amazing presses out there. And so when it comes down to publishing a book, it costs money. It's whether the traditional publisher is going to pay for those processes up front or whether you're going to pay for those processes up front. And
right,
what does it look like? Because you're still going to end up paying that traditional publisher and that literary agent. You're just going to pay them on the back end with your royalties.
right. And that's nice because if you can go that route and you be able to pay them with the royalties, that's great. But I think a lot of people go into it thinking that they have to have all this money, 50, 60, $70,000 to go in and do a publisher. And then they think, well, if the book doesn't sell, I'll never reap from that. I knew somebody that had a huge launch party and put so much money into a launch party and didn't even have a traditional publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And I just looked around thinking this is such an incredibly waste of money right now because as I knew that the book wasn't going to go anywhere because that person did not have that skill set of understanding how to do a book launch, understanding how to sell. Just like we'll just use my devotionals as an example, Coffee with Christ and Brew Blessings. I chose that theme of Coffee with Christ. And then I thought, well, I'm going to stick to that theme, right? So
Mm-hmm.
my devotionals have a theme of coffee lovers, meaning sit down with your coffee and do your devotional in the mornings. My next one, Cup of Grace, that comes out in about a month. Again, it's all around that coffee theme. So the first thing that I knew, being that I do know sales, and sales has been my background for 17 years in healthcare, I do know marketing, I do know sales. I knew, well, where would be the first place that someone would buy my book? It's going to be a church or a coffee shop, right? Or
Right?
a church's cafe. And so this is where my book has been marketed, and this is where you
Mm-hmm.
can find it. Yes, you can get it on Amazon, but you can also get it in different coffee shops, all around, as well as churches that have cafes, because it just makes sense from the coffee lover standpoint. But you have to be able to think that way. And if you don't have that background in marketing and sales and know where to target it, you have to have somebody to do that for you, or you'll end up doing like my friend did and not being able to have that spend all that money on a launch party and not actually putting it into a virtual launch and something that's going to have some type of ROI at the end of the
Absolutely.
day. And we have to have it. So for somebody that says to you, Carolyn, I am, Cherie, I'm not a writer. I don't know how to write. I almost failed English, but I have an incredible story to get out there. Where would you have them start that writing process?
Literally journaling or taking their phone, turning on the voice recorder and talking into it and
Mm,
telling it. Because one of the keys of a good writer is that unique voice. And their unique voice might not sound like this polished English grammar that we learn when we're writing a composition. My
right,
website does not sound like my dissertation, nor should it. You're not going to want to read my dissertation on organizational change and institutional research unless
right,
that's your field, right? It wasn't meant to be entertaining. It was meant to be instructive to the literature. And so you always have to know your purpose. If your purpose is to share your story with as many people who want to read it,
Mhm.
great, we can make that happen. But if your purpose is to build your platform, there's a whole different strategy that would go into how you're going to craft the story, what things you're going to put in the book, how you're going to use it. So like
Right.
you mentioned, being a coach, right? And you have a story that led you to being this specific type of coach. As Christian coaches, we have those stories that led us to this
Mhm.
specific coaching journey. And we use our story to help our clients. And our story can draw in new clients as well. And so we can strategize about crafting this story that builds your platform, puts you on stages, and shares the word of God all at the same time. How
Right.
amazing is that, to be able to worship him, share the transformations that he's done in people's lives, and yet use it to build abundance for his kingdom.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. But this is another thing that I have been told. I've had a woman come to me with a story that would have made an incredible book, probably made an incredible movie, but she was too afraid to
Mm,
tell her story. And so she left all of the most important details. She wrote a book, but she left all of the most important details that really made that testimony come to life out of the book because her family told her to. She had the fear of rejection and judgment. And one of the persons that she was talking about in the book was still living,
yes.
and she did, and was a family member, and so did not feel comfortable putting that out there for
Right.
legality reasons. So what would you say to that person? Is that person, hey, go on with your story, or is there a hurdle that you would have them jump over to actually see if that story needs to be told?
But it's the timing and
Hmm.
allowing God to craft that story and to choose his timing, because the
Hmm.
time may not be right. She may have to wait for a particular family member to
Right.
pass away
Right.
before that story can be told. But let's backtrack even further. What do they do? What's step one? Step one is to pretend you're never, ever going to publish this.
Hmm.
You're going to write it or you're going to voice record it to you and God. You're never going to publish this. And literally get it in your mind that you're never going to publish this. No living soul will see what I'm doing. Write on the front of it to your kids, burn upon my death, whatever you need to do. Okay. And write to where it's just you and God. You're the only, he was there. So he knows already all the details. He remembers them better than you do. So just, write it all down. Be honest, be gut wrenching, be graphic, even if you have to be. Because one of the things that you're going to do when you're crafting the story for an audience is probably not be as graphic. You're going to be specific, but maybe not as graphic as you might be when you're writing it just you and God.
Right.
And then what that's going to do is that's going to walk you through some of the healing. It's going to
Hmm.
point out the places that you might need more professional help and healing. Because if you are writing your story and it's so gut wrenching that you can't write it yet, you're not writing from a place of healing. And we have to write that story from a place of healing. And so
Right.
that's why I say I do believe every story needs to be told, but it might not be the right time. And so that would be one of the conversations. That's why I always do consultation calls with the authors.
Sure.
And then what I recommend them to do is, if they're facing that fear, pick the hard one. Pick the one that you're in your mind saying, well, I could write everything else, but this incident, I can't write that. I can't tell that yet.
Hmm.
Get
I like
alone
that.
with God and write that one. If you can write that one, knowing you're never going to publish that one from what you're writing right there, if you can do it, you're ready. If you can't write that one, you're probably not ready yet. And that's okay. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean you might not ever write it. It doesn't mean God's not calling you to write it. It might mean that it's just not the time yet, that you might need to seek professional help or a life coach or something to help walk you through that that journey to get to the point where writing that is putting it out in a world in a healing space.
So what do you think about ghostwriters? If you are speaking into a recorder and you're telling your story, which to me sounds super easy. If I was telling my story, of course, at the beginning when I told the story, Wake Up Call, Mother's Grief Journey, I had an editor, I had a publisher.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so it was more of a story of the mom walking through the grief at the beginning. My
Right,
story is a whole nother story now, which I have not
right.
written. What would you say to that person that does not think that they have a story that is worth sharing? So, hey, I haven't lost a child. I haven't lost a mom. I haven't been raped. I'm not a drug addict, wasn't a drug addict. They think it has to be this dramatic story, even though
Mm-hmm,
they do
mm-hmm.
have a good testimony. How would they share it if they don't feel like it's worthy to be shared? But after having a consultation with them, that story definitely needs to be out.
I can remember being a teenager and thinking, oh my gosh, all of these amazing testimonies. Lord, I want an amazing testimony like that. And then walking through 14 years of rebellion, I'm like, okay, I now have an amazing testimony like that. And Lord, why on earth did I pray that stupid prayer? If
Be
I could
careful
have
what you
just
ask for.
be careful what you ask for. So what I would tell somebody is it's comparison. Comparison steals, kills, and destroys. Don't compare your testimony and the transformation God has done in your life, because I guarantee you the transformation you have walked through and won victory in, there are a million people out there in this world of billions that
Mm-hmm.
need to hear and have that same transformation. And you may be comparing it to someone else, and then the enemy is using that comparison to steal that voice. I would love to have heard someone say, I didn't have any of these sins, quote unquote, that the world said were horrible or that the Christian culture said was horrible,
Mm-hmm.
but my sin was pride. And I didn't realize how destructive that was. And talking about walking through pride, because I know the root of my sexual sin was actually pride.
Right.
And if I would have read stories of older women, from me at the time as a teenager, so someone, older than me saying, I was just this stereotypical church girl, but pride was eating me up inside and I had to get rid of that. That might
Mm-hmm.
have saved me from years of walking in these sins that I ended up walking in.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to be this big flashy thing.
So if they're recording, every day they're picking up the phone, and we all
Hmm.
have the recording app on our phones that we can record and record as we're thinking and talking to
Right,
God out
right.
loud. But they're thinking, I can't write this. I don't have the time, or I don't know how to put it in the right sense. Ghostwriters. Is that a thing that you recommend?
It is totally a thing. In fact, I am ghostwriting a memoir for someone right now, because that was what was most comfortable for him. And so that is exactly what we do is interview process. And then I take that. But ghostwriting is hard because I'm going to have to write that in his voice, not my voice.
Mm,
But if you're the writer, it's a lot easier to write in your voice because that is your voice. You're not having to constantly check in to see, is that how Carolyn says that? Or is that how this client says that?
right.
So I would not recommend ghostwriting unless that just absolutely is not the path for you. And often it's not because you're not a writer, but because there are too many other things on your plate, too many things going on. Then I would absolutely hire a ghostwriter. I see no reason not to hire a ghostwriter.
Yeah.
However, what I would say to those people who are thinking, well, I just am so uncomfortable with the writing, I need a ghostwriter, especially if they're a Christian coach, look at all the podcast episodes you have. A 30-minute podcast is going to be thousands of words of your
Mhm.
story.
Right.
Look at all of the material that you've written and put out for your clients. Those are an additional thousands of words. A
Right.
typical memoir is going to be 60,000 words. That's a couple of podcasts. I mean, it's
True.
it's not the huge mountain you might think it is. That's why you see all of these ads for get it written in 30 days. And it's because it is possible.
Hmm.
It is possible. You just have to start. And I will tell you, the typical excuses you hear for why people are not a writer actually have more to do with editing than writing.
True.
We're all writers. If you're a storyteller, you're a writer. And if you're a coach, you're a storyteller. You tell stories all the time to your clients to help them grow.
Right.
And if you're a storyteller, you're a writer. Leave all the editing and worrying about if it's grammatically correct and all that. Leave that to your editor.
Yeah, that's what I do, Carolyn. I will tell you, I am fortunate enough. And you met my sister.
I
She's
did.
wonderful and she's extremely smart, graduate from Louisiana State University, just very smart. And I was fortunate enough to, after the first book, Wake Up Call Mother's Grief Journey, that was published, and I had an editor then. And when I took it on myself, I thought, well, I'll just get my sister to do it. Well, then she went on and got her certification in copywriting and all of these things. And so I am fortunate where I can hand that book over because
Right.
listen, I have no pride. I will do a run on sentence in 2.5 seconds. I will
Amen.
use the same word 3 times in two
That's right.
sentences. I do all the stuff because my brain works that way so
That's right.
quickly that I'm getting it all out in a Word doc, literally just in a
Yes.
Word doc. And I will
Yes.
hand it to my sister and say, fix all of the editing issues that I have before I put it into format because I had to teach myself how to do the format
Right.
in order to do it. I had nothing else. I had nothing else to turn to. I didn't know a Carolyn.
Right.
I didn't know all of these things. It was literally thrown back in my lap. And in order to keep the story going, I had to take it back on. And then I found that, I have a whole nother story here 17 years later after my son
Mhm.
passed away. Because in 2014, when the book came out, I wasn't podcasting. I wasn't doing any of those things. So
That's
the
right.
story looks completely different than it did 7 years after Bryant died versus 17 years after Bryant died.
See, and
And so,
that's the difference between a memoir and an autobiography. An autobiography
mm,
looks at a person's entire life. Memoirs look at a specific instance, a specific transformation. So that
mm,
transformation of that grieving mother from that grief to now I know how to walk in this every day and what that
right,
looks like on a day-to-day basis now. And then now, as this business leader, that's a different memoir, exactly like you said. And so people have so many different memoirs in them. And that's
right,
the difference between that autobiography. And they think that they have to write everything. You don't have to write everything. It's about where were you? What was the transformation? And then where are you now? It can literally be broken down into that simple. We heard it at the retreat. And it
right.
is literally that simple. That's what I have always taught all of my authors. So when I saw the speaker put that up there, I just grinned because that's literally
Yeah,
the process that we walk through. And
right,
people, again, it's that comparison. They're comparing their first draft with all the run-ons and all of the writing the same word 3 times in the same sentence
yeah,
to the published, polished versions of their favorite writers,
right,
not realizing that those favorite writers of theirs did 6 to 7 edits of their own before they handed it off to a professional editor about 3 different times.
right,
And so again, we're comparing our first draft to this beautiful polished draft and not thinking about all the different edits that went on in between. And so I
right.
tell all of my writers, I want you to give me a really crappy first draft.
Yeah,
Turn off the editor and just write and give me every run-on sentence and every cliche and everything. And then we'll go through and highlight, and then you'll edit all that out on later drafts. Give
yeah.
it
That
to me.
has to be comforting to some of the women listening today because I think that's the thing. They don't want to be embarrassed. They think that rough draft is going to be really rough and they're going to be embarrassed. But then you use that daggum word comparison, and that's a whole
Mhm.
nother episode. It's like, don't compare your story no more than you compare your hair or your body type. Don't
That's right.
compare your story to someone else's story because
That's right.
your calling on your life may not be the same. Carolyn and I both are in this writing genre together, but her expertise in writing and why I write in my writing is completely different.
Right.
And, two, you have to think about your purpose. So what is your why in writing?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I had to come to grips with. My writing initially was all about healing.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote, like you said, in a journal. I preach writing in journals all the time. People could call me the preacher of journal writing. And because I truly believe that getting it all out, because it has to go somewhere,
It does.
right?
It
And so
absolutely
you
does.
can either take everything that's inside and you can deflect it on someone else. You can hurt someone else with it. You can hurt yourself with it, or you can get it out because, I believe that when it comes to the top, it has to get out somewhere. And so you don't want it to come out in a way of doing something that's destructive to you or someone else. So I wrote everything down in a journal and wrote and wrote and wrote for 7 years before I ever wrote my first book. And I know some people may be thinking, well, I don't have 7 years to write my book. I did not intend on writing a book. So
That's
let's
right.
make that clear. It didn't take me 7 years to write the book. I was journaling for 7 years. It wasn't until the last 6 or 7 months of journaling did I start listening to some of the people that were in my ear saying, you need to write a book, you need to write a book. It didn't take me 7 years to write it. The journaling was the healing aspect of it.
That's right.
So it's, why are you writing it? Are you writing it because you want to get a message out to help other people? So how can we use our faith in a way that's powerful in helping and serve others? Are you writing it because we know that business cards are a thing of the past and people are
Mm-hmm.
using their books on stages to as their card, right? Their
Right.
postcard or their business card? Or are you writing it because you want to have that as income and you're believing that it's going to
Mm-hmm.
save you? And it can, depending on how you put your book out into the world.
Right.
I believe we have to find out what our why is. After we figure out what our why is, then I figure we need someone like you, Carolyn, to kind of craft it from the beginning because
Yeah.
it took me so long and I could have saved so much time had I had someone that was holding my hand and walking with me through that journey instead of me going, okay, well, let me get on YouTube and try to figure out what the format is.
That's right.
It's so easy to self-publish once you have the book finished on
Mm-hmm.
Amazon, right? It's so easy to do that, but that's the easy part. The
That's the easy
hard
part.
part is actually crafting the message to
Yes.
get it because you can't chat GTP that, right? You can't go into
Mm-mm.
chat and say, hey, write my story for me because chat don't
Nope.
know you.
That's right.
Chat doesn't know your story. You have to have somebody that can walk beside you. So if someone is thinking about it, they're on the fence right now on what to do with their message that they have, whether it was a pain, whether it is something that they're an expert in and they just want to
Mhm.
get that out there, right? They want to talk about their expertise. What would be the very first thing that they did if they've already talked into the recording, they have it all written down in Word and they go, okay, it's just going to sit here because I don't have tens of thousands of dollars to publish this book? What would be the first step that they should do with that Word document or that recording that they've already done?
They're going to need to have that outline and that structure. And that would be the first thing that we would work on together is
Right.
taking all of that stuff, figuring out a structure and an outline so they can literally play with it like it's a puzzle piece. And they just start popping those different pieces into that puzzle. You see,
Yeah.
when God calls us, He's already been preparing us. And there may
Mm-hmm.
be still a further season of preparing, but he has already been preparing us. Like, I had no idea when I was an executive in higher education that God was going to have me leave that and start helping people share stories. Yet he had me publishing for 20 years. He had me attending a memoir writing class in Harvard as one of my very first
Wow.
classes. I had no idea I would use that 30 something years later, you know?
Right.
I had no idea that the journal upon journal upon journal, just exactly like you said, Cherie, where you had 7 years of journals. So then when it came time to write the story, you're like, oh, well, it's right there actually, sitting in all of these journals. I
Right.
had journal after journal after journal that I could just grab and say, okay, here's the story.
Mm-hmm.
So God will have prepared you. You probably have journals sitting on your desk that you don't even aren't even thinking about, or maybe they're in a box in an attic that
Right.
you aren't even thinking about that you could go grab, and there's already language right there. So that next step is literally taking those puzzle pieces and putting them into an outline, and I can teach people how to do that and how to make that structure to give a reader a transformation as they're reading the book so that their why is accomplished, whatever God has laid on their heart, whether it be that business card like you talked about, or whether it be to make them realize that maybe they need coaching in this specific area, and to make them aware of a struggle that they may not have realized that they had. There's so many different ways that you can structure the book to lead the reader, because that's what we do. That's what a good book does, whether it's a fiction or a nonfiction book. It leads you to a transformation just in the reading of it.
Carolyn, you are awesome. Where were you back in 2014 when I needed you? Now you're in my life, which I'm so happy that you are. And guys, if I can talk Carolyn into coming to the conference and the retreat that I am going to have, the Queen Bee Transformation Conference and Retreat next year, this will be the time for you to come to the retreat.
Absolutely.
Because Carolyn is, she can make a lot of time. We'll put her on stage on a panel and we'll just drill her with all kind of questions. And then she can be there for us as well, which I would love. And Carolyn and I, we got to talk about that, because I would love to have you there.
I would be honored.
We're going to add that to our plate. And, I don't usually have to twist anybody's arm when I'm asking them to come to Naples, Florida. I mean, I really just don't. No. It's not a hard sell, Carolyn. Well, let everybody know where they can find you. We could talk for days, but where can someone find you to be able to have that conference, find you on social media, your website, all the good stuff?
Okay, so website roseandpearl.net. And on social media, it's Rose and Pearl Publishing. So that's where I am. And Rose and Pearl comes from the fact, just like you said, beauty to ashes. The rose has the thorns. There's pain involved in that beauty. The pearl comes from that challenge that the oyster is given, this irritant that it has to work and work and work. And yet it transforms this irritant into this beautiful creation. And so your stories are those roses and those pearls that are showing how that pain and those challenges bring forth beauty in people's lives. So roseandpearl.net. And then you can also find me on social at Rose and Pearl Publishing. And if you go to roseandpearl.net/get started, I'll have a get started guide for you that you can jump in today. But free consultation calls. I love visiting with you. I would love to give you what your personal next step would be. So reach out to me. Let's chat and me craft for you what that next step is for your personal writing journey.
Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate you so much.
Absolutely. I appreciate you too, Cherie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Cherie Rickard Show. I hope you feel inspired and empowered to take action in your life today. Before we wrap up, I'm excited to share that 2025 is going to be an incredible year for transformation. I am offering an exclusive Queen Bee coaching opportunity designed to help you rebuild, transform, and prosper in every area of your life. Plus, we're gearing up for the Queen Bee Transformation Conference and Retreat. This is going to be a life-changing event where we will dive deep into faith, healing, and the power of creating the life that you deserve. This is your time to reclaim your story, and I'll be right here with you. Be sure to subscribe to the show, share it with someone who needs a little encouragement today. Follow me on social media at The Cherie Rickard Show for updates on everything we have coming your way. Until next time, keep shining and keep believing, because you are chosen and you are